I never imagined I'd feel invisible in my own home, dismissed by the very people I had raised and nurtured. For years, I had poured everything into my family, sacrificing sleep, comfort, and even my pride for my son, Michael. I thought love was enough, that the bond between a mother and her child was unbreakable. But I was about to learn, the hard way, that trust can be weaponized, and the person you welcome into your home can slowly, almost imperceptibly, turn the world against you. It started innocuously, the way danger often does. Small comments that didn't seem threatening at the time. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, had been sweet, almost too eager to please. She smiled at me when Michael left the room, complimented my cooking, asked about my day. At first I was relieved. I had been worried Michael would bring home someone cold, someone incapable of understanding the chaotic rhythms of family life. But Sarah was careful, deliberate. Her praise always carried a subtle undertone, a seed of doubt planted quietly, like she was testing the soil before anything could take root. "Mom," she said one afternoon, "I'm worried Michael's stretching himself too thin. He works so hard, but I think he needs to make some tough decisions about the house." Her voice was calm, measured, concerned even, but the phrasing, the insinuation, lingered in my mind long after she left the kitchen. Tough decisions about the house. I had raised him here. I had scrubbed every floor, painted every wall, tended every garden. I had built this home, and she had the audacity to plant the thought that maybe I wasn't capable anymore. I brushed it off, told myself I was imagining it. That was the first mistake. In the following weeks, her concern grew. It was subtle, slow, a drip of influence that changed the rhythm of our household. She'd call me in the living room while Michael was at work and whisper about bills or the repairs I should consider. Then, later, she would mention in passing how Michael had been worried about my energy, how he wanted me to rest more, always framing it as care, always using his name like a shield for her words. It was psychological precision at its finest. I hadn't yet realized that by the time I recognized it, she would already have begun reshaping the narrative in his mind. I remember one evening vividly. I had spent the day reorganizing the pantry, dusting the corners of the living room, and baking his favorite chocolate cake for no reason other than that I wanted him to smile when he came home. When Michael arrived, he looked tired, distracted. Sarah greeted him with a warm hug and whispered something in his ear. He nodded, a faint frown creasing his forehead. Later, in the kitchen, I asked him how his day was. He muttered something about work stress, glanced at Sarah, and I caught it. A hesitation, a tiny shift in loyalty. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was being paranoid. But the small cracks widened. Michael started spending less time at home, suddenly prioritizing Sarah's opinions over mine. At first, it was minor things, rearranging the furniture, changing the way the dishes were stacked, insisting that certain household chores be outsourced for my own comfort. I laughed at the irony. After years of managing every corner of this home, now they suggested I was incapable. But laughter became hollow. It was the sound of my authority quietly eroding. The turning point came during a Sunday dinner. I had invited some old friends over, people Michael had known since he was a boy. Sarah offered to help, her smile bright, her hands steady, but she was directing, controlling every detail, from the napkin folds to the seating arrangement. Michael seemed passive, deferring to her judgment. I tried to speak up, to suggest a minor change, and it happened, the first clear act of betrayal. He interrupted me, quietly, politely, but firmly. "Mum, let's just go with Sarah's plan." I froze. The room spun in that moment, a subtle, crushing weight. I realized he had started to see me not as the mother who had raised him, but as an obstacle, someone whose opinions were inconvenient. Sarah had positioned herself as the lens through which he now viewed me. Every complaint she planted, every worried word about my health or abilities, had taken root. I could see it in his eyes, a hesitant obedience, a respect that was no longer for me but for her influence. That night, I sat alone in the living room after they had gone to bed, a slice of my chocolate cake untouched on the counter. I replayed every interaction, every casual comment Sarah had made over the past months. Her strategy was clear now, deliberate and cruel. She wasn't just a daughter-in-law, she was a tactician, and I had unwittingly become the target. The house felt different, smaller, colder, as if it had shifted around me. I was still the legal owner, still the mother, still the one who had poured every ounce of love into this family, but suddenly, my position, my authority, my very presence felt expendable. Sleep that night was restless. I turned over in bed, thinking of every choice I had made, every sacrifice I had endured, every moment I had been the silent anchor of this family. And yet, for the first time, I felt powerless, not in a dramatic, fleeting way, but deeply, fundamentally powerless. It was terrifying, the realization that trust, the very foundation of family, could be weaponized against me. And I knew then, with a clarity that settled like ice in my chest, that if I did not act, if I did not plan, I would soon be erased from my own life. The following weeks were a slow-burning storm. Sarah's influence over Michael deepened. He began questioning my decisions openly, suggesting that I was overreacting to small things, that I needed to be more reasonable about home repairs, my social activities, even my interactions with the neighbors. It was subtle, insidious. Every day she built walls between us, cementing her role as the arbiter of what was appropriate, safe, or wise. And every day I felt the familiar ache of betrayal grow sharper, the trust I had placed in my own child turning brittle, cracking under the pressure of manipulation. I started documenting everything, not out of paranoia, but out of necessity. Conversations, transactions, moments of subtle aggression and control. I wrote dates, times, exact words. I wanted a record, a lifeline, because I understood that memory alone could be questioned, twisted, or denied. I realized, with a growing sense of dread, that the very person I had welcomed into my home, the woman I had treated with kindness and acceptance, was carefully engineering a reality in which I would appear incompetent, irrelevant, even dangerous. And yet I still hesitated. I still questioned myself. Could it really be as deliberate as it felt? Was I overreacting? Was this paranoia? Every mother doubts herself. Every loving parent asks, am I reading this right, or is my heart exaggerating? But deep down, I knew the truth. Sarah had a vision, a plan, and I was the obstacle. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the first true confrontation occurred, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Michael called me while I was in the garden, hands deep in soil, planting tulips for spring. He spoke carefully, his tone polite but firm. Mum, Sarah and I think it might be time to consider assisted living, just for a little while. You've been tired lately. We just want what's best for you. I stood there, spade in hand, feeling the weight of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal skipped, every penny spent to ensure his future. And in that moment, I understood fully what had been happening. They were planning to remove me, not for my safety, not for my health, but because I was inconvenient. They wanted the house, the control, the life I had built. I wiped my hands on my apron and asked him to repeat himself. And he did, this time carefully, as if reading from a script. I could hear Sarah in the background, soft, persuasive, reminding him of Mum's best interests. But it was no longer subtle. The gloves were off. My son, the boy I had nurtured from a baby into a man, was being used as a tool against me. I felt a strange mix of fury and sorrow, grief for the trust that had been shattered, and a cold determination settling into my bones. I didn't speak right away. I let the words hang between us like smoke, and in the silence, a plan began to take shape, not one of confrontation, not one of anger, but one of deliberate, quiet reclamation. They had underestimated me. They believed their control was absolute. They believed that a mother at my age could be easily sidelined, and in that assumption, they had already sealed their fate. The game had begun, though neither of them knew it yet, and I realized, as the wind moved through the tulips and a few petals brushed against my hands, that the quietest, most patient person in the room can also be the most dangerous. I would not be erased. I would not vanish. They would learn, slowly, deliberately, what it meant to underestimate a mother. The days that followed were a tense dance of appearances and hidden intentions. I kept my interactions with Michael measured, careful, outwardly warm but internally alert. Every word he spoke, every glance he cast, every tone he adopted had been subtly influenced by Sarah, and I knew that direct confrontation would only make him retreat further into her web. So I observed, silently cataloguing patterns, watching how she maneuvered him like a chess player moving pieces across the board. It was exhausting, heartbreaking, but necessary. I refused to let my home, the place I had built with love, be taken from me without a fight. It became clear that Sarah had mastered the art of contrast framing. To him, I was now the stubborn, outdated, overworked mother, while she presented herself as the rational, caring partner. She never attacked me outright, that would have been too obvious. Instead, she framed every suggestion as a choice between me and reason, subtly implying that my actions were a threat to Michael's happiness or the family's well-being. Every disagreement was carefully framed so that his loyalty shifted imperceptibly. By the time I noticed, he had begun to see me less as his mother and more as a barrier to the life they wanted to construct together. One evening, after another subtle remark about my interference in home management, Michael left the room abruptly, saying he had a call with Sarah. I stayed behind, staring at the walls I had painted, the photos I had hung, the memories I had embedded into every corner. It was no longer a home, it was a stage, and I was no longer a part of the script. I realized that the person I had welcomed, trusted, and even adored had slowly restructured my world. And yet, in that moment, my resolve strengthened. If they thought I would disappear quietly, they had misjudged me completely. I began to introduce small tests, subtle probes to understand the limits of Sarah's influence over Michael. I asked questions about plans they made together, comments about decisions they were making, and watched how he reacted. Each response revealed layers of conditioning. He hesitated, often deferring, sometimes defending her perspective over mine, without fully understanding why. It was not just manipulation, it was a psychological siege. They were systematically eroding my position, my credibility, my authority, and I had to respond strategically. The first step was to rebuild communication lines, but indirectly. I reached out to Michael's friends, colleagues, and even distant relatives, not to complain, but to share stories and memories, to remind them of the person Michael had been before Sarah's influence became so pronounced. It was subtle, careful storytelling, planting seeds of awareness without attacking Sarah directly. The goal was to create a mirror, a reflection of reality he might someday recognize, and to strengthen my network of support in case I needed it later. Sarah, of course, noticed the shift. Her behavior became more overt, more controlling. She tried to isolate him further, scheduling private outings, controlling his interactions, and framing any attempt on my part as nagging or over-involvement. Yet, with every move, I learned more about her strategy. I discovered that she relied heavily on repetition and emotional framing. She knew that repeated, carefully crafted phrases could reshape perceptions over time. Words like tired, overworked, inconsiderate, and stubborn became weapons in her arsenal. On Saturday, she suggested a family meeting to reassess responsibilities. Michael, now conditioned, agreed, looking at me expectantly. She outlined tasks, subtly casting doubts on my ability to manage anything beyond basic cooking and cleaning. I listened carefully, responding only with calm, factual statements. I refused to react emotionally, knowing that any outburst would play into her narrative. When she framed a suggestion as concern, I acknowledged it neutrally, neither defensive nor acquiescent. It was a delicate balance, to assert authority without giving her ammunition. It was exhausting, but crucial. I began keeping detailed records of interactions, documenting conversations, noting when she framed statements in certain ways, or redirected Michael's attention. I also started writing letters, private letters not to be sent, but to clarify my own thoughts, organize my evidence, and anticipate potential manipulations. It became a ritual, a lifeline. In these letters, I poured out my observations, my fears, and my strategic plans. They helped me maintain clarity in the chaos, a mental map of the battlefield Sarah had created within my own home. Despite the growing tension, I sought moments of genuine connection with Michael, carefully choosing opportunities where she was not present. I shared anecdotes, memories from his childhood, even small gifts that carried personal significance. The goal was subtle but vital, to remind him of the bond we shared before manipulation took root, to offer a counter-narrative to the one Sarah had constructed. At first, the moments were short, strained, even met with hesitation, but slowly, cracks appeared in his conditioned behavior. Moments of doubt flickered across his face, subtle but unmistakable. One evening, while helping him fix a minor plumbing issue, he paused, wrench in hand, and asked almost quietly, "Do you really think Sarah is always right?" My heart skipped a beat. This was the first explicit acknowledgement of conflict between his loyalty to her and his underlying trust in me. I responded calmly, "I don't know if anyone is always right, Michael. But I do know that perspectives matter, and it's important to think for yourself." I avoided directly criticizing her, knowing that the more I framed it as guidance rather than confrontation, the more likely he was to listen. Sarah noticed, of course. She became sharper, more insistent, increasingly framing her words to highlight my supposed failings. The tension in the household became palpable. It was no longer subtle. The influence war was overt, with me defending my presence and authority while she sought to weaken every thread of connection Michael still had with me. The air was thick with unspoken words, a silent battle where each move could tip the balance. Through all of this, I realized that my ultimate goal could not be mere confrontation or revenge. It had to be reclamation, restoring the trust, authority, and love that had been quietly undermined. Every day, every interaction became part of a strategic effort to outmaneuver manipulation without losing my own integrity or moral grounding. I understood now that the fight was not just for a house or even for respect. It was for the truth of our relationships, for the authenticity of family bonds, for the life I had built and deserved to protect. And slowly, methodically, I began to see results. Small moments of hesitation in Michael, a questioning glance, a reflective pause after Sarah spoke, tiny indicators that the foundation she had tried to build was not as unshakable as she thought. I started seeing patterns in her manipulation, anticipating her moves before they happened. Where she had once acted with complete confidence, now there were cracks, small inconsistencies in her carefully constructed narrative. The first real turning point came when Michael confided a minor but telling incident to me, a small disagreement over finances where he admitted he wasn't sure whose advice to follow. The words were hesitant, almost apologetic, but the trust in my guidance, however tentative, was a spark. It was the beginning of a reversal, proof that influence, no matter how subtle or well-planned, could be countered with patience, clarity, and unwavering commitment. And as I watched him wrestle with his own doubts, I realized a crucial truth. No matter how carefully someone manipulates, no bond built on genuine love and history can be completely erased. It may be buried under layers of doubt, suspicion, and deliberate framing, but it can resurface. And in that moment, I understood that the next phase of this battle would require skill, patience, and courage, qualities I had in abundance, though they had been tested like never before. The days following that small breakthrough were filled with subtle tension and quiet observation. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere, almost like a current beneath the surface, imperceptible to anyone else but impossible to ignore for me. Michael's hesitation became more noticeable, his words more measured, his tone less defensive when I spoke. It wasn't an immediate reversal. Manipulation, after all, leaves deep traces, but the seed of awareness had been planted. I knew that to cultivate it I needed patience, strategy, and above all, emotional control. One wrong word, one emotional flare, and Sarah's influence could snap back into place like an elastic band, pulling him right back under her sway. I also began to understand Sarah's psychology more deeply. She was clever, yes, but predictable. Her control depended on maintaining a constant narrative, a consistent story in Michael's mind, that she was the rational, loving partner, and I was the obstructionist. Her manipulations were subtle, often delivered as casual remarks or friendly advice, but they always carried a carefully calculated emotional weight. Once I recognized the pattern, I could begin to anticipate her moves, to navigate the conversations so that I remained a neutral, calm anchor rather than a target for her narrative. It became increasingly clear that she feared exposure. Every time Michael wavered, I noticed small signs of frustration, a tightening of her tone, a slightly sharper edge in her words. This was my window. I began to create moments where Michael could reflect without pressure, shared walks, quiet conversations while cooking, casual chats that seemed ordinary but carried deeper meaning. I avoided direct confrontation, knowing that any attempt to catch her in wrongdoing would likely push him back into her camp. Instead, I focused on subtle influence, offering insight without accusation, stories without judgment. One evening, as we were preparing dinner together, Michael paused mid-chop and said, I think I might be seeing things differently. My heart clenched, but I forced a calm smile. What do you mean? I asked, keeping my tone neutral, inviting reflection rather than pushing him toward an answer. He hesitated, glancing toward the living room where Sarah's presence was always felt, even in absence. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I might be missing something. Maybe I've been too quick to dismiss some things. The admission was small, but it was monumental. It was the first time he recognized a discrepancy between the story Sarah had constructed and his own experience. From that point, I began weaving gentle contrasts into our conversations. I didn't attack Sarah. Instead, I highlighted choices, shared memories, and emphasized perspective. Do you remember when we worked on your science project together? I asked, smiling at the memory. You were so determined, so independent. You thought through every problem and made your own decisions. That determination is still inside you, Michael. It's worth remembering when making choices today. I spoke softly, letting nostalgia reinforce his own judgment and autonomy, rather than forcing him into a defensive posture. Sarah's tactics grew bolder in response. She began scheduling more private outings, insisting on planning events without consulting me, even questioning my intentions to Michael directly. I stayed calm, documenting every instance, noting patterns, and strategizing responses that were factual, measured, and non-confrontational. Her aggression was a sign of insecurity, a window I could use to help Michael see beyond the narrative she constructed. Manipulators often escalate when challenged indirectly. Understanding this allowed me to remain calm while planting seeds of reflection. One weekend, she arranged a family outing that excluded me. Michael hesitated when he realized I wasn't invited. Mom, you don't want to come? He asked, a mixture of confusion and subtle guilt in his tone. I smiled gently, masking the sting of exclusion. It's okay, Michael. You have plans. Enjoy yourselves. But inside, I noted his hesitation. That moment, though small, indicated that the bond between us was stronger than she believed. He was beginning to navigate the tension, unconsciously weighing the narratives I had reinforced against the ones she imposed. As weeks passed, I continued my strategy of subtle influence and careful observation. I created safe spaces for dialogue, asked reflective questions, and gently reminded Michael of his own reasoning capabilities. At times, it was frustrating, so many moments where his loyalty to her seemed absolute. But I reminded myself that change is incremental. Every micro-decision, every flicker of doubt in his expression was a sign that my influence was reaching him, even if only at a subconscious level. The critical turning point came unexpectedly. One evening, Michael came to me, eyes downcast, voice hesitant. Mom, I think I need to rethink some things. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice calm, neutral. What kind of things? I asked, allowing him to elaborate without interruption. He took a deep breath and began recounting small incidents, decisions Sarah had influenced, conversations he had remembered differently, promises that hadn't been fulfilled. For the first time, he was critically evaluating her actions on his own, rather than relying on my framing or prompting. The moment was delicate and monumental, a signal that the foundation of manipulation was beginning to crack. I guided him gently, offering questions rather than judgments. How did that make you feel? I asked. What would you have decided if no one else's opinion mattered? Each question encouraged him to think independently, to reassess the situation without feeling attacked or manipulated himself. By reinforcing his autonomy and validating his emotions, I allowed him to reclaim control over his own judgment. Sarah noticed the shift immediately. She became defensive, her tone sharp, her smiles tight and calculated. But by then, I had documented and anticipated her patterns so thoroughly that her aggression revealed itself rather than intimidated us. Michael, now increasingly aware, began to recognize inconsistencies, moments of manipulation, and the subtle pressure she exerted. He started asserting his opinions more freely, questioning her suggestions and seeking my perspective as a neutral guide rather than a partisan adversary. It was not an overnight transformation. The process required patience, persistence, and strategic restraint. I had to balance guidance with autonomy, influence with neutrality, and observation with emotional support. Each interaction became a careful orchestration designed to restore his judgment without triggering defensive loyalty to Sarah. The delicate dance required constant awareness, yet I could feel the tide slowly shifting in our favor. By this point, I realized that the power of subtlety and patience had become my greatest weapon. Direct confrontation would have been futile, possibly disastrous, but through carefully framed dialogue, shared experiences, reflective questions, and quiet observation, I had begun to dismantle the narrative that had been constructed around him. His growing awareness was proof that manipulation, no matter how sophisticated, can be countered with calm, strategic, and patient action. And so, as I watched Michael regain a measure of clarity, I understood a fundamental truth. Relationships built on love, trust, and shared history have resilience. They can endure manipulation, misdirection, and deception. The human mind, given the space to reflect and the guidance to question, can discern truth from narrative, and while the battle had been long, subtle, and emotionally draining, I now knew that the path forward, toward restoration of trust and reclaiming my rightful place, was within reach. The next few weeks felt like walking on a tightrope. Every conversation with Michael required careful attention to tone, choice of words, and timing. I had to balance support with subtle guidance, ensuring that he felt his own autonomy while slowly peeling away the layers of influence Sarah had built around him. I noticed that he began to reflect more critically on past incidents, connecting dots that had previously seemed unrelated. It was as though a fog was lifting, revealing the patterns that had once been hidden in plain sight. One evening, Michael and I sat on the porch, the air heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth. He was unusually quiet, staring at the horizon as if searching for answers in the fading light. I kept my voice soft, non-judgmental, and calm. "You've been thinking a lot lately," I said. He nodded, but didn't respond immediately. Moments passed, each one stretching with tension, until finally he spoke. "I don't know why I didn't see it sooner. Some of the things she said, they don't add up. And yet, I felt like I had to believe her." The confession was subtle but revealing, a crack in the wall of manipulation. It was clear that Sarah's influence was beginning to wane, but her tactics evolved as well. She tried to reassert control through subtle emotional manipulation, casual remarks designed to induce guilt, selective omissions of information, and even attempts to create conflicts between Michael and me. But by now he was more discerning. I noticed him pausing before reacting, considering his response rather than instinctively siding with her. Each moment of hesitation was a small victory, a sign that the internalized influence of manipulation was weakening. I continued to reinforce Michael's confidence in his own judgment through reflection and validation. "Remember when you solved that issue with your work project on your own?" I asked one evening casually. You didn't need anyone to guide you. You trusted your instincts and knowledge. His expression softened, a hint of pride flickering in his eyes. These small reminders helped him reconnect with the sense of self that had been obscured by Sarah's constant narrative. The process was painstakingly slow, but each small step mattered. One afternoon, Michael came to me with a notebook in hand. "Mum, I've been writing things down," he admitted, voice hesitant. "Conversations, events, things that don't quite sit right with me. I want to make sense of it all." My heart leapt, but I maintained my composure. "That's a good approach, Michael. Writing things down can help you see patterns and understand what feels true for you." The act itself was symbolic. He was reclaiming his agency, documenting inconsistencies, and actively questioning the influence that had dominated his decisions. As he delved deeper, I noticed a transformation in his demeanor. He became more assertive, more willing to express his opinions, and less defensive in the face of Sarah's subtle provocations. She responded by intensifying her attempts to isolate him, creating scenarios that would require loyalty tests. But with each challenge, Michael grew more resilient. He began to articulate boundaries, calmly refusing to be manipulated, and often turning to me for reassurance rather than defaulting to Sarah's narrative. The conversation didn't happen immediately, and that was a deliberate choice. Timing mattered. Rushing would have triggered defensiveness and possibly further manipulation. Over the following days, we prepared strategies, discussed potential reactions, and explored ways for Michael to remain calm and grounded. The goal was not to humiliate Sarah or prove her wrong, but to restore transparency and mutual respect within our family. It was about reclaiming the truth and doing so with dignity. When the day finally came, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. Sarah had an air of confidence, unaware that Michael had fundamentally changed. He started by addressing small, neutral topics, shared memories, family routines, before gradually introducing more personal observations. "I've noticed some things that don't quite add up," he began, careful with his tone. "I want to understand them better, so I can be honest with you and with myself." His words were direct but measured, designed to open dialogue rather than provoke confrontation. Sarah's reaction was a mixture of surprise, confusion, and veiled defensiveness. She attempted her usual strategies: deflection, rationalization, and subtle emotional pressure. But this time, Michael didn't waver. He listened, asked clarifying questions, and calmly stated his perspective, grounding himself in his observations and experiences. There was no accusation, only clarity, a mirror reflecting the inconsistencies she had tried to mask. For the first time, she was confronted not with submission, but with reasoned self-awareness. I observed quietly, letting Michael take the lead while remaining a supportive presence. It was remarkable to see the transformation in him, the confidence, the calm logic, the refusal to be drawn into reactive behavior. His composure highlighted the depth of change that had occurred, revealing how far he had come from the confusion and manipulation that had dominated his life. The tension in the room was palpable, but it was balanced by a sense of inevitability. Truth was surfacing, and it could no longer be ignored. Sarah's tactics shifted as the conversation progressed. She attempted to charm, to rewrite history, and even to provoke guilt, but Michael's responses were measured and firm. He didn't respond with anger or defensiveness, but with questions and statements rooted in his own perception. "I understand your perspective," he said at one point, "but I also need to acknowledge what I experienced and how I felt. That's real for me." Those words, simple yet profound, marked a turning point. He had reclaimed his narrative, and it no longer depended on her validation. As the conversation drew on, subtle cracks appeared in Sarah's facade. Her arguments became repetitive, her tone more strained, and her attempts at emotional manipulation less convincing. Michael remained consistent, calm, and anchored in his own understanding. By the end of the discussion, there was no dramatic confrontation, no explosive revelation, just a quiet acknowledgement of reality. It was an unspoken recognition that the dynamic had changed, and that her previous influence was no longer effective. After the conversation, Michael and I sat together in the living room. He was quiet, reflective, yet there was a sense of relief in his posture. "Mom, I can't believe how different it feels," he said softly. "I feel like I finally see things clearly, and it's freeing." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The liberation was not just from manipulation, but from the internal conflict and doubt that had clouded his judgment. It was a profound moment of self-recognition and emotional clarity. From that point on, our family interactions became more balanced. Sarah's presence no longer dictated the terms of engagement. Michael's choices reflected his own judgment, and I observed him asserting boundaries with quiet confidence. He was no longer reacting to manipulation. He was making deliberate decisions, guided by reason and self-trust. It was a subtle but powerful shift, the kind that changes relationships at their core. The journey also highlighted the importance of observation and patience. Change does not happen overnight, and attempts to force awareness can backfire. By allowing Michael to gradually perceive inconsistencies, reflect on his experiences, and rebuild trust in himself, the transformation was authentic and sustainable. The process was a testament to the resilience of the human mind when guided with empathy, support, and strategic patience. Michael's growth extended beyond our family as well. He approached colleagues with renewed confidence, navigated social situations with increased discernment, and even managed previously stressful situations with poise. The skills he had cultivated, critical thinking, emotional regulation, and self-awareness, became second nature, reinforcing the changes in his personal life. It was remarkable to witness how regaining control in one area of life could ripple outward, strengthening other facets of existence. Throughout this journey, I reflected on my own role. It was tempting to intervene directly, to confront Sarah aggressively, or to attempt to force Michael's realization, but such actions would have risked resistance, defensiveness, and deeper entrenchment. Instead, I learned the value of subtle influence, consistent support, and patience. By focusing on fostering self-trust and critical thinking, I provided Michael with the tools he needed to navigate manipulation independently, a far more lasting and empowering outcome than any immediate confrontation could have achieved. In the months that followed, the family dynamic stabilized. Michael continued to assert boundaries respectfully, Sarah's attempts at manipulation became less frequent and less effective, and our relationship grew stronger. The bond we shared, tested by external influence and internal conflict, had emerged more resilient than ever. The process had been challenging, emotionally taxing, and sometimes painful, but it demonstrated the power of patience, empathy, and unwavering commitment to truth. It also underscored a vital lesson: manipulation thrives in silence and unawareness. By fostering awareness, encouraging reflection, and nurturing autonomy, it is possible to counteract even deeply ingrained patterns of control. Michael's transformation was a powerful reminder that personal agency, once reclaimed, can dismantle influence and restore clarity, not only in relationships, but in one's own sense of identity. Through this experience, I gained a deeper understanding of family dynamics, trust, and the delicate balance between guidance and autonomy. The journey with Michael taught me that true influence is not about control, but about empowerment. By helping him reconnect with his own judgment, I did not impose my will. I provided the environment, support, and encouragement necessary for him to rediscover his voice. The outcome was not dictated by force, but by the strength of relationship, patience, and careful guidance. Even as Michael regained clarity and asserted his boundaries, the undercurrents of tension with Sarah remained. It was a subtle war, fought not with words or confrontations but with unspoken power plays and attempts to regain influence. She realized her previous tactics no longer worked, and that alone fueled a quiet but relentless frustration. It was in these moments that I observed her true nature, stripped of the charm and manipulation that had so easily ensnared him before. She became increasingly unpredictable, shifting from false sweetness to sharp criticism in ways that were almost imperceptible, but palpable enough to test patience and resilience. Michael, however, had learned to navigate this new terrain. Where before he had been reactive, he now approached interactions with calculated awareness. He could anticipate the emotional triggers, recognize subtle attempts at manipulation, and respond with measured calm. This wasn't arrogance or detachment, it was mastery over one's own emotions, a skill cultivated through experience, observation, and patient guidance. Watching him, I felt a mix of pride and relief. He was no longer vulnerable to the tides of influence that had once left him adrift. The family environment shifted dramatically as a result. Conversations that had once been fraught with tension became more balanced, though careful observation revealed the quiet undercurrents still at play. Sarah's attempts to dominate subtly were met with firm but polite resistance. She would try to interject opinions over decisions, push for certain outcomes, or sway family members with selective truths. But Michael, now grounded in his perspective, responded in ways that made her influence less effective. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was relentless, persistent, and transformative. During one particular family gathering, I observed a moment that crystallized the shift. Sarah began recounting a story, subtly twisting events to cast herself in a favorable light while minimizing past actions. Previously, Michael might have interjected defensively or second-guessed his memory. This time, he calmly interjected with clarifying details, not to embarrass her, but to ensure the truth was clear. "I remember it differently," he said quietly, "and here's why." His tone was neutral, almost conversational, yet it carried authority. Others noticed the difference. The balance of power had shifted, and the shift was undeniable. It was remarkable how the dynamics of influence operated within our family. For so long, control had been exercised through charm, guilt, and emotional leverage. Once awareness was introduced, however, those mechanisms lost their potency. Michael's newfound clarity served as a protective lens, filtering attempts at manipulation and allowing him to respond strategically. I realized that influence is not about who is louder or more persuasive in the moment. It's about who holds a clear perception of reality and acts from a grounded sense of self. Yet, even with progress, vigilance was necessary. Sarah adapted her methods, recognizing that the previous patterns no longer succeeded. She began attempting subtler tactics, implying doubt, questioning motives, and occasionally sowing discord through indirect comments. Michael, now experienced in discernment, remained unfazed, recognizing these maneuvers for what they were. His responses were deliberate, emphasizing facts and his personal perspective while avoiding emotional escalation. Over time, the effectiveness of these tactics diminished, leaving her increasingly frustrated and isolated within interactions. It was in observing her reactions that I fully appreciated the psychological complexity of such manipulative behavior. Individuals who rely on control and influence often experience a profound sense of threat when their strategies fail. Their frustration, subtle aggression, or attempts to reclaim dominance are not merely personal, they are conditioned responses to losing a source of power. Recognizing this allowed Michael and me to approach situations with empathy, without enabling manipulation, and without succumbing to reactive behavior. Understanding intent and pattern is as important as addressing behavior itself. Over the months, family events became exercises in quiet strategy, decisions were made collaboratively, conversations flowed more naturally, and Michael consistently exercised his autonomy without hostility. Sarah's presence no longer dictated the rhythm of interaction. Instead, Michael subtly guided dynamics, reinforcing boundaries while maintaining respect. It was a delicate balance, assertiveness tempered with diplomacy, but one that strengthened the family's cohesion and reinforced Michael's sense of agency. One day, Michael confided in me, reflecting on how the journey had reshaped his perception of trust and relationships. "Mum," he said, "I realize now that I can't blindly trust anyone, even people I love. Trust has to be earned, and it requires awareness and boundaries. I understand that better now than ever before." His words carried a weight of experience and introspection. It was a milestone. He had internalized lessons not only about manipulation, but about self-respect, discernment, and the complexities of human behavior. I shared with him a perspective that had guided much of my approach. It's not about mistrust, Michael. It's about balance. You can care deeply for people and maintain love, but you must also protect yourself by being aware, by questioning, and by standing firm in your reality. That's not cynicism, that's wisdom. He nodded, absorbing the nuance. It was a lesson that extended beyond the confines of our immediate family. It was a principle applicable to all relationships, professional and personal. Michael's transformation was also evident in how he supported others within our family. He began mentoring younger relatives, offering guidance with patience, and modeling behaviors that emphasized clarity, self-trust, and emotional regulation. His ability to recognize manipulation and respond thoughtfully became a resource for those around him, subtly shifting the family culture toward openness, transparency, and resilience. Influence, once wielded destructively, now became a tool for empowerment. The change was not without emotional labor. It required resilience, patience, and sustained self-reflection. Michael occasionally experienced moments of doubt, lingering guilt, or residual anxiety from past manipulation. In those times, he leaned on strategies we had developed together: journaling, reflecting on facts, discussing emotions openly, and maintaining boundaries. These methods reinforced his stability and ensured that progress was lasting rather than superficial. Emotional recovery, I realized, is as critical as intellectual clarity when navigating manipulation. As the year progressed, Sarah's attempts to regain influence became increasingly transparent. She would sometimes insert herself into conversations, make selective remarks, or attempt to sway opinions indirectly. However, each attempt met the same outcome. Michael remained anchored in his perspective, unreactive to provocation, and consistent in his communication. The repeated failure of her tactics slowly eroded her confidence, highlighting a universal truth about manipulation. Once the target perceives reality clearly, attempts to regain control often backfire and lead to self-isolation. By the time the next major family milestone arrived, a large gathering for a holiday celebration, the transformation was complete. Michael's confidence was evident in his demeanor, his interactions were grounded in clarity, and Sarah's influence had been substantially diminished. The atmosphere was calmer, more collaborative, and characterized by mutual respect rather than tension. Observers would have noted the subtle but powerful shift. Autonomy and awareness had replaced manipulation and uncertainty. The holiday gathering arrived, and with it came the subtle choreography of family dynamics I had come to anticipate. Sarah arrived dressed impeccably, smiling with a practiced warmth that masked a simmering tension. She moved through the room with calculated ease, attempting to engage in conversations and assert influence subtly, but the room's energy had shifted. Michael, now self-assured, greeted her cordially but remained composed, steering conversations with tact and clarity. It was as though the gravitational pull she once exerted had been neutralized, leaving her efforts increasingly ineffective. Guests began to notice the change, some whispering comments about Michael's newfound confidence. In past years, discussions were punctuated with awkward silences or subtle conflicts instigated by Sarah, but now dialogue flowed naturally, with collaboration and genuine interest. Michael navigated topics from current events to family decisions with an even tone, demonstrating discernment, tact, and emotional intelligence. His responses were neither defensive nor aggressive, but they subtly reinforced boundaries. For the first time in years, the family environment felt stable, balanced, and free from the oppressive tension that had marked previous gatherings. I watched Sarah's expressions with careful attention. At first, her smile remained intact, but subtle flickers of frustration betrayed her inner awareness. She was no longer in control. She attempted to regain her footing by steering conversations toward topics she could dominate, but Michael's calm, confident interjections subtly redirected the flow. He did not argue. He clarified, asked thoughtful questions, and gently corrected inaccuracies without alienating anyone. The effectiveness of her previous strategies had dissipated, and her growing irritation was evident to anyone paying attention. One of the most revealing moments occurred during a group discussion about holiday traditions. Sarah tried to position herself as the keeper of the family's correct ways, recounting past decisions as if her perspective were indisputable. Michael listened attentively, then calmly added, "I remember it differently, and I think there's value in considering all perspectives. Perhaps we can combine our approaches this year." His voice was even, his tone neutral, yet it carried authority. Those present understood that he had both the insight and the emotional maturity to navigate conflicting views without escalation. Over the course of the evening, Sarah's influence waned further. Subtle attempts at manipulation, innuendos, selective storytelling, and attempts to incite disagreement were met with neutral responses and gentle redirection. Michael's clarity had effectively neutralized her tactics, and the resulting frustration manifested in quiet tension rather than overt conflict. Observing her, I realized how disempowering it can be for someone who relies on manipulation when confronted with unyielding self-awareness. Power, after all, exists only when perception is aligned with influence. Once that alignment is broken, control dissipates. I spent part of the evening reflecting on the journey that had led to this point. It was remarkable to see how boundaries, awareness, and emotional resilience could fundamentally transform relationships. Michael's growth was evident not only in his interactions with Sarah, but in his broader demeanor, calmer, more confident, and more empathetic toward others. He had learned to navigate the complexities of human behavior, recognizing when to assert himself, when to observe, and when to disengage. This mastery over relational dynamics was not innate, it was cultivated through experience, guidance, and intentional self-reflection. During a quieter moment, Michael approached me and shared a reflection that captured the essence of his transformation. "I realize now that manipulation is only powerful if I allow it to define my reality," he said. "By staying grounded and observing clearly, I can respond in a way that preserves relationships without compromising my integrity." His words resonated deeply. It was a lesson about human nature, but also about personal empowerment. Influence is strongest not when imposed, but when resisted with awareness and calm conviction. Sarah's attempts at indirect manipulation continued throughout the evening, but each one fell flat. She tried subtle hints about past decisions, gently questioning Michael's choices to incite guilt, but his responses remained steady, anchored in fact and empathy. By remaining composed, he transformed potential conflict into constructive dialogue, demonstrating the profound effect of self-awareness and emotional intelligence in neutralizing manipulation. Observing this, I felt both relief and pride. Pride in Michael's growth, and relief that the oppressive tension of previous years had finally eased. Interestingly, other family members began to adjust their own behaviors in response to Michael's example. Younger relatives, previously hesitant to speak or assert themselves in the presence of Sarah's influence, began contributing more openly. Conversations became more balanced, and the family dynamic shifted toward collaboration rather than competition. The presence of one individual who could navigate manipulation effectively had ripple effects, subtly empowering the entire family structure. This transformation highlighted a crucial truth. Emotional intelligence and awareness not only protect the individual, but can reshape the relational environment for everyone involved. Sarah's frustration became increasingly apparent as the evening progressed. Her attempts at subtle dominance and influence were met consistently with calm clarity, leaving her without leverage. She occasionally attempted to provoke reactions through veiled criticisms or selective storytelling, but the family had adapted. There was a collective recognition, subtle but unmistakable, that previous methods of influence were no longer effective. It was a powerful illustration of how boundaries and awareness, once established, can fundamentally alter power dynamics. As the evening drew to a close, I reflected on how far the family had come. Michael's transformation was central, but it was the broader shift in awareness and relational equilibrium that felt most profound. The tension that had once defined family gatherings had dissipated, replaced with a sense of stability and respect. Sarah, now aware of her diminished influence, had limited impact. Her attempts at control were transparent and largely ineffective. The family, guided by clarity and empathy, had reclaimed a sense of collective balance that had seemed impossible only months earlier. Later that night, as I reviewed the day's interactions, I realized that the journey with Michael and Sarah had taught a fundamental truth. Relationships, no matter how complex, are shaped by perception, awareness, and boundaries. Influence is neither inherently positive nor negative. Its ethical value depends on intent and the clarity of those involved. When one party wields influence manipulatively, the target's awareness becomes the key factor in determining outcomes. Michael had learned to protect himself not through confrontation, but through understanding, observation, and emotional mastery, a strategy far more effective than aggression or avoidance. By the end of the evening, a new equilibrium had been established. Michael's confidence, empathy, and clarity served as a stabilizing force, while Sarah's influence had waned, leaving her frustrated but contained. The family had witnessed the transformative power of self-awareness, and the dynamics of manipulation had been fundamentally altered. The lesson was clear: awareness and emotional intelligence are not just defensive tools, they are instruments of empowerment, capable of reshaping relationships and fostering long-term stability. The days that followed the holiday gathering brought a subtle but unmistakable shift in family life. Michael's confidence, previously a quiet undercurrent, had become a visible presence, and even Sarah seemed to sense that her previous tactics held less sway. Conversations at home and during visits were now freer from tension, infused with openness and a new sense of mutual respect. It was almost as if the atmosphere itself had changed, a result not of confrontation or punishment, but of the quiet strength and clarity that Michael consistently exhibited. I noticed how Michael's interactions with Sarah had evolved as well. She was no longer trying to manipulate him directly, likely realizing that those efforts were now futile. Instead, there were occasional attempts to regain influence through charm or subtle praise, but he met these gestures with composed acknowledgement rather than validation or critique. By maintaining neutrality, he prevented the familiar cycle of guilt, doubt, or defensiveness that had defined their relationship for so long. In doing so, he effectively reclaimed his own agency without provoking conflict. This shift in their dynamic had ripple effects throughout the household. Family discussions were no longer dominated by tension or manipulation. Decisions, whether about finances, events, or minor domestic matters, were made collaboratively, guided by reason and mutual respect. Even small disagreements were resolved with calm dialogue, rather than heated arguments or passive-aggressive undertones. The change was tangible, and it illustrated the profound effect that emotional intelligence and awareness can have on complex relational systems. One evening, Michael and I sat together after dinner, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. I never realized how much of my energy was spent on trying to manage someone else's behavior, he admitted. I thought if I just explained myself more clearly or tried harder to please her, things would get better. But the real change came when I stopped letting her manipulations dictate my reactions. His insight captured a crucial truth. Personal empowerment comes not from controlling others, but from understanding oneself and responding with clarity. Michael's transformation extended beyond his relationship with Sarah. He had become more attuned to the emotions and needs of other family members, fostering deeper connections with siblings, cousins, and even friends. The patience and awareness he cultivated in dealing with manipulation had broadened his capacity for empathy, making him more approachable and trustworthy. His growth demonstrated that navigating toxic relationships skillfully does not isolate a person. It strengthens their social bonds and enhances their influence in positive ways. Sarah, despite her frustration, began to adapt in subtle ways as well. Without the leverage she had once relied upon, she started presenting herself differently, occasionally showing genuine warmth and participation in family activities without attempting to dominate. While her motivations were not always clear, the family environment benefited from this adjustment. It became evident that when one party in a manipulative relationship changes, even marginally, it can prompt a re-evaluation of behaviors and strategies, often resulting in a more balanced and harmonious dynamic. As weeks turned into months, the sense of equilibrium in the household solidified. Michael had established firm boundaries that were respected by all, including Sarah. She sometimes tested limits, but he consistently responded with calm reinforcement rather than confrontation. Over time, the power struggle that had once defined their interactions dissipated, replaced by mutual recognition of roles and respect for personal space. It was a testament to the effectiveness of consistency, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence in transforming even the most challenging relationships. Observing this transformation, I realized that the lessons extended far beyond our family. The principles of awareness, boundary setting, and measured response are universally applicable, whether in workplace dynamics, friendships, or broader social networks. Manipulation, while potentially destructive, can be neutralized through clarity, empathy, and consistency. By refusing to engage in reactive patterns, a person not only protects themselves, but also sets a precedent that can reshape the behaviors of those around them. One afternoon, I found Michael speaking candidly with Sarah about a minor disagreement over household responsibilities. Instead of confrontation or defensiveness, he approached the topic with clarity, outlining his perspective and listening openly to hers. The conversation, which in previous years would have escalated into tension or guilt-tripping, ended with mutual understanding and agreement on a practical solution. It was a clear demonstration of how the skills he had developed, assertiveness, patience, and perspective, allowed him to navigate conflict successfully without perpetuating old patterns of manipulation. The impact on family morale was equally remarkable. Relatives who had previously felt the strain of Sarah's influence now engaged more freely, expressing opinions and sharing experiences without fear of reprisal or judgment. Michael's approach created a safe emotional space, proving that leadership in relationships is not about domination, but about fostering trust, respect, and balance. The household felt lighter, more collaborative, and more resilient, a reflection of the transformative power of self-awareness and measured response. Sarah's reaction to this shift was mixed. At times, she seemed relieved, enjoying a more peaceful environment without needing to orchestrate conflicts. At other times, subtle frustration crept into her behavior, a reflection of the diminished control she once wielded. However, these moments were brief, as the family had collectively established a culture of respect and clarity that no longer enabled manipulation. The evolution of her behavior underscored a key principle. While manipulative individuals may resist change, consistent boundaries and awareness inevitably influence their actions, often steering them toward more constructive interactions. Over time, I began to notice that Michael's example influenced not just his peers, but also younger family members. They observed how he maintained calm, communicated clearly, and refused to engage in power struggles, internalizing these behaviors as models for their own interactions. This ripple effect illustrated an important truth. Emotional intelligence and awareness are not isolated skills. They propagate through social systems, shaping culture and expectations within families and communities. The journey with Michael and Sarah ultimately reinforced the significance of patience and resilience in the face of manipulation. Quick reactions, anger, or attempts to force change often exacerbate conflict, whereas consistent, thoughtful responses cultivate stability and respect. By remaining grounded and clear, Michael demonstrated that influence derived from integrity and self-awareness is far more powerful than manipulation or coercion. His evolution was a masterclass in human behavior, offering lessons that extend well beyond any single family dynamic. In reflecting on the entire experience, I recognized that the transformation was both personal and relational. Michael had grown into a more confident, empathetic, and self-aware individual. The family had become more cohesive, resilient, and emotionally intelligent as a result. And even Sarah, despite her continued attempts to assert influence, had been compelled to adjust, acknowledging, at least implicitly, the new reality. It was a testament to the idea that change, when guided by clarity and consistency, can reshape even the most entrenched patterns of interaction. As I watched Michael interact with the family now, I felt a profound sense of relief and pride. He had navigated a complex, emotionally charged situation with grace, patience, and unwavering integrity. The lessons he had learned about manipulation, awareness, and emotional intelligence were not theoretical. They had been applied in real time, reshaping relationships and creating lasting harmony. This outcome affirmed the timeless truth that true empowerment comes not from controlling others, but from understanding oneself and responding with clarity and composure. Ultimately, the journey with Michael and Sarah was a story of transformation, not only in one individual but across an entire relational system. It illustrated that even the most challenging relationships, fraught with tension and manipulation, can evolve when approached with awareness, patience, and emotional intelligence. By establishing boundaries, maintaining composure, and fostering empathy, Michael had not only protected himself but also improved the quality of life for everyone around him. This story serves as a reminder: manipulation loses power when met with clarity, awareness, and measured response. Influence is strongest not when imposed, but when exercised through integrity and insight. By understanding human behavior and cultivating emotional resilience, it is possible to navigate even the most difficult relationships successfully, turning potential conflict into opportunities for growth, understanding, and lasting harmony.